I represent District 9, which is made up of 3 or 4 neighborhoods, depending on, how you cut it. So St. Mary's Park is often kind of lumped in with Bernal Heights, but sometimes the people who live there feel like it's a distinct neighborhood. So, I'm always like, do I represent 3 or 4 neighborhoods? So
Right.
I'll just err on the side of distinct neighborhoods and say 4 neighborhoods, which are the Mission District, Bernal Heights, St. Mary's Park, and the Portola.
That was District 9 Supervisor Hillary Ronen. I'm Jeff. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. In this podcast, Hillary tells the story of her parents and how they met in Los Angeles, where she grew up. She went to college at UC San Diego and spent a couple of years after graduation in Barcelona to learn Spanish. She came back to go to law school at UC Berkeley, but after a couple of summers away doing various legal work, she had a realization that landed her in the Mission District. Here's Hillary.
Both of my parents had a profound impact on my life in very different ways, and I've always been very, very close to my father, so I've been very acutely aware of his impact on my life. And it's only since I've become an adult that I've begun to really appreciate the impact my mother has had on me as well. And they're amazing people, and like all of us, they're complicated and difficult. And but the reason I think my dad had such an impact on me, in certain ways, my sort of the gender roles were reversed in my family. My dad was the more sort of emotionally engaged parent who would, whenever I was upset or going through a crisis or needed help at school or anything, he was the main person that was there getting me through it. In fact, now that I have a daughter, when she has, like kind of crazy emotional breakdowns and I'm dealing with them, I'm really understanding what I put him through. And I've been calling him and saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is so hard. I can't believe how many times I called you crying and you like counseled me through whatever drama I was engaged in."
Yeah.
So he was kind of the emotional caretaker and nurturer. And then my mom was kind of the steady breadwinner who, was always working a million jobs, make ends meet.
I'm sorry, how did they meet?
In a nightclub.
Yes.
It's a funny story. So my mom grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and to a middle-class Jewish family. And when she wanted to get away from her family, basically when she grew up, and so after she graduated from college, she's a speech therapist.
Mm-hmm.
She moved to Los Angeles, and it was kind of the furthest from Milwaukee she could get away to, and so she moved here.
I'm thinking dreary, dark, snowy Milwaukee, sunny Southern California.
Exactly. She's like, "Get me out of here. I want to be on my own." And so she moved out west and began teaching in Los Angeles, and has been spent her entire career in the Los Angeles Unified School District.
Wow.
Doing speech therapy with especially kids, not especially with all kids, but she had a specialty in kids with handicaps. And so I grew up, and this is like part of how I'm realizing the profound influence my mom had on me that I didn't appreciate until becoming an adult. I grew up around, ever since I was born, kids with mental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it was so normal. It wasn't, there was, my mom has this amazing way of treating people genuinely as an equal, and it's so genuine. And it's natural for her. It doesn't take any work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just these kids that she would do speech therapy with would often be at my house, or she would take me with her to their houses. And then I would end up playing with them and their people that we grew up together and we're friends till today. And
Awesome.
I developed, a real love and understanding of people with differences, worked for the Special Olympics for a while.
Oh, wow.
And so that, I never gave her or that experience enough credit for influencing who I am.
Right.
Until now. And I'm realizing more and more what an influence that had on me. What I recognized my whole life and still recognize as having had a major influence on me was my dad's experience. He was an immigrant from Israel. He was born and raised in Israel, served in the army as a paratrooper, and lived on a kibbutz in his younger years. And when he was on a kibbutz, there was an American woman who came to live there, and they fell in love. And he also kind of escaping his parents, similar to my mom. They're just independent people,
Right.
very independent people. And so he, took a boat from Tel Aviv, Israel, all the way to New York City, and penniless worked his way on the boat here, slept, with the workers in the steerage passage as a steerage passenger, and slept in bunks and all of that. Arrived in New York, and quickly the relationship didn't work out. And so he was alone, penniless, didn't speak great English, and really didn't know anybody, except he had a great aunt who was living, I believe, in the Bronx.
Okay.
And so he moved in with her and really just started.
Was she part of maybe why he went to New York? I mean, that was
it was for love.
Oh.
Yeah. He went for love and
followed his heart.
And so he ended up with the great aunt. Poor guy. But he, he worked in every sort of working class job you can think of, trying to make ends meet, trying to learn English. He was undocumented at the time, although being undocumented at that time was such a different thing than it is
Wasn't
today.
Stigmatized by it, really.
Not stigmatized.
Yeah.
And he had white skin. So the combination of having white skin and it not being stigmatized, he had a thick accent, which, impacted him many times in his life.
Sure.
But he was able to, he also didn't have the American context of so much, racism. So he was in pretty much at the time in all African-American Black neighborhood.
Okay.
And he would go to the barbershop to get his hair cut, and they'd all look at him like, what are you doing? He had no idea what was going on.
Well, we Jews can have curls, it's true.
Yeah,
but
it's
not
there, right?
whole other level.
Right, it's true. But he always thought they treated him weird because of his accent. He had no concept at that point of white racism against Black people and the systemic racism that he was existing in. And so that's kind of his story. He was driving a cab for a while, and then he started making his way from New York out to the West Coast. He lived in Detroit. I mean, he lived all over the place. And finally landed in LA. And
when would that have been? Maybe 60s or so?
Yeah, definitely the 60s.
I'm guessing you're born in the 70s.
I was born in 75, and they were together quite a while before they had me. So
maybe early 60s.
It would have been early mid-60s.
Okay.
Yeah. They met in a nightclub, and my mom tells the story that he asked for her number, and she gave it to him, but he didn't write it down. And she just said, oh, he's not really interested. That'll never happen. And sure enough, he remembered the number and called her, and they got together.
He was being cool. He's like, I don't need to write it down.
Exactly, right. I'm going to impress you with my memory.
Cool. So he made the call.
He made the call.
And was your mom living at home at this point? Did her dad answer or something?
Oh, no, because they were in Milwaukee, and she was alone in LA.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah. Okay.
And he lived in Hollywood, and I think, after a while they moved in together, and I think they were together a good 5 or 6 years before they had me.
Okay.
And I was born December 22nd, 1975. And like a few days later, they moved into an apartment building in West LA where they still live today. In a rent-controlled apartment in West Los Angeles, a tiny 2-bedroom apartment for 44 years. But yeah, I grew up in that apartment, and I still go visit them in LA in that same apartment, and
Awesome.
they're the only ones left from the time that we moved in.
Sounds
They're
familiar.
the godparents of the apartment building, and they take care of, all the kids that are now there and are like the grandparents to them. It's very sweet.
Do you have siblings, Hillary?
I do. I have a younger sister.
Okay.
She's 6 years younger than myself, and she was born in 1982 and lives in Long Beach, so not as far away from my parents as I do.
Right.
And has one son, who was born 1 week after my daughter.
Oh, wow.
So the two of them are best friends, and it's very sweet.
Yeah, and your parents have one of each.
One of each. One grandson, one granddaughter. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, so you were born, I guess you don't remember the first few years of your life, so we'll skip over that. But what was it like to grow up in LA? Did you say West LA?
West LA.
Yeah.
There were good things about it, and then there were bad things about it. Like the good things about it were, we did live in this apartment with a courtyard, so we could be safely outside in the city of Los Angeles within this enclosed gated courtyard. And so and there were lots of kids growing up, so we'd all play together in the courtyard, and that part was good. There's a very big car culture in LA, which I don't like. I love public transportation. I love being able to get around by myself. And growing up, my parents had to drive me everywhere, and they're very overprotective. So even when I became a teenager, I wasn't allowed to take the bus. And it wasn't the culture to take the bus for kids, right? Like it is here in San Francisco. It just didn't happen, at least not in West LA. And LA is so huge that it just takes so long to get from one place to another. And I grew up in a very, West LA is pretty wealthy, but my micro neighborhood wasn't that wealthy. And then my parents weren't wealthy. So I grew up in a, middle working class household. My mom being, my dad was, pretty much always had working class jobs. And then my mom was a school teacher. And so we were, middle working class. When my mom went on strike, with the teachers, we had a hard time putting food on the table, like that kind of thing.
Did your mom work when you and your sister were little?
Yeah,
okay.
My mom's a worker bee.
Yeah,
I think we took off like a few weeks, and then we went to daycare. Yeah, but we always had our home-based daycare, so it was like having another family. And my mom's still close today with the people that took care of us when we were little. And yeah, she always worked a lot, so she'd work all day, and then she would do private therapy classes at night. So sometimes we'd go with her, sometimes we'd be home. But it was like, middle working class households in San Francisco. You can't survive with one job, and they both had to have several jobs in order to keep us going. But what was really influential to me was watching my dad, because he's a really, really smart guy, and he always had these minimum wage jobs where people didn't treat him with the respect that he deserved. And because he was so smart, and he would read a lot, and was always really up on current events, and had strong opinions, and had a real deep analysis about inequality and injustice, he would always stand up for himself and his coworkers in the workplace, and then suffer the consequences. So even though he was so smart and good at whatever job that he did, he would never advance because he got against injustice. And so which there was a lot of in minimum wage jobs
Sure.
in this country. And so, he would struggle a lot with that, and I would watch that, and it would upset me. And, we would discuss issues in our households of what, what's fair and just and equal, and abuse of power, and what it means to live in a capitalist society, and all that kind of stuff. We'd have those really overt discussions, and I would watch its impact on my very family. And
right.
So
how young would you say you were when you started having those conversations? That's really awesome, by the way. Yeah. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I mean, it was just part of
as long as you remember, kind of thing.
As long as I remember, yeah. I remember, in nowadays I don't fully agree with all his analysis, but at the time, but the fact that we would talk about it, I was aware of what was happening. Like, he was very upset about school busing because he felt like it was, wrong to make kids travel, really far neighborhoods in communities where it was so apparent how different they were from their own, and that it caused more damage. Nowadays, I don't know if I feel that way nowadays, right? It's like, but we would have those critical discussions, and I wasn't probably sophisticated enough at the time to push back, but I would be thinking about them and thinking, like, is that fair? And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And like
you said, some of the topics that you guys talked about were not abstract. Like, you would see the effects of.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. The concept of social justice and inequality, and a society that was systemically flawed in pretty much every institution, was something that I was aware of pretty young. And as I grew older, my understanding of it grew deeper and deeper. I had always sort of been interested in giving back to my community, and I did it in some, pretty funny, non-political ways when I was younger in high school, like, doing recycling campaigns and giving drunk high school students rides home. And my real sort of political activism started in college.
You went to San Diego, right?
UC San Diego.
Okay.
So I went down south, further south, to UC San Diego, and UC San Diego has 5 smaller campuses, and one of the campuses was focused on sort of systemic racism and social justice, and sort of changing the system. And that's, of course, the campus I chose is called the Thurgood Marshall campus.
Oh, awesome.
And we had like specific curriculum around that. And
was it like a public policy type of program, or?
Well, it was undergrad, so it was, you could major in whatever you wanted to major, but it had a track that was sort of like, it was diversity, justice. There was one more component of it I don't remember, but all the students in the college had to do that one curriculum, and it was all about sort of the history of racism and inequality. There was a big emphasis on race and on the use of race in this country to basically justify oppression and unequal treatment among people. So there was a whole curriculum about that. And then in addition, a whole justice curriculum that involved, both in and outside the courts. It was pretty amazing. There was a whole course as well on hegemony and sort of how those in power use the media and our everyday culture to sort of enslave us in these ideas. It was radical. It was sophisticated. It was amazing. I loved it.
It's how you end up with a reality TV star president. But I won't. We don't need to go down that.
For example,
just one.
But at UCSD is when I first started engaging in activism, and in those days. So it was 1990. I started college in 1994, and Prop 187 and 209 were being pushed forward by Pete Wilson, the Republican governor at the time of California. And I was super embroiled in fighting those awful state propositions. 187 would have prohibited any government or public resources used for undocumented individuals, including schools for children, for the public school system. And Prop 209 did successfully end affirmative action as we knew it. We lost both at the ballot, but we won the 187 fight at the courts. And then I studied abroad for a year in England at the University of Sussex, as one way of escaping San Diego. And that was incredible. I had an incredible year where I met really radical students that even further politicized me. And then I came back, finished my last year at UC San Diego, and immediately left San Diego. And I think I've been back once for my friend's bridal shower. And other than that, I haven't been that.
Really good Mexican food, beaches, weather, all that stuff. And that's it for me. Anyway. I'm just like, yeah. Okay.
It wasn't my place. I got a great education. I loved Thurgood Marshall campus. I met some really great friends, but it was not my place, and I really haven't gone back since.
Right.
But I got a lot out of it, and what I decided was I needed to learn Spanish because I knew that I wanted to work in social justice. I knew that I'd always been really interested in like the rest of the world outside of the United States. And, I thought it was pretty sad that I could only speak one language. And I wanted to learn Spanish. And I had a friend living in Barcelona, Spain, who I had met at UC San Diego. So fast forward to me to two of the best years of my entire life. I lived in Barcelona and I learned Spanish.
And did you graduate in 4 years?
I did.
Yeah.
So I graduated in 98. And then I spent the summer of 98 working like 4 jobs. And I was just saving up as much money as I could in order to have a little spending money to start off with in Barcelona. And so Barcelona was so dirt cheap at the time because it was, first of all, it hadn't been recognized, kind of like San Francisco at the time, right? It hadn't been recognized as one of the most beautiful, incredible, fantastic cities in the world. It hadn't gentrified in the way it is today. And they hadn't moved over to the euro.
Right.
So they were still using pesetas, and everything was compared to California dirt cheap. And so I started off just doing, jobs that undocumented people could get under the table. I passed out flyers on Las Ramblas, which is one of the real tourists avenues of Barcelona for Museum Erotica, and a bunch of like under the table jobs. And then eventually I just started meeting a bunch more people who introduced me to other people who wanted to learn English. And so I just became a private English tutor / teacher. And I would walk from one house to the next during the day to give my classes, which was the most privileged moment of my life because I got to walk around the most beautiful city in the world every single day. I knew it backwards and forwards at the time. It was a long time ago. But
for those who haven't been to Barcelona, let's see if you agree with me. It's like the city, part of what is so charming and beautiful is the architecture, the streets, everything, like these big, wide sidewalks and everything. But you got to actually go in to several of those beautiful buildings.
Absolutely.
Which not everyone gets the opportunity to do.
Yeah, no, it was an incredible 2 years of my life. I learned Spanish. I met some of my best friends to this day. I got to live a life at a pace that was kind. I worked very little, and the little that I worked gave me enough money to pay my room in a flat with a bunch of roommates, and pay for my food and pay for my Spanish classes, which was all I had to pay for at that time, pretty much. And oh my gosh, I can't speak highly enough about it. I wish, what makes me sad is that Barcelona was a little behind San Francisco in terms of the wide-scale gentrification, but it certainly happened. The switch from the peseta to the euro made made everything a lot more expensive, a lot quicker. But it would be hard to do today what I did in 95. In 98.
Which echoes a lot of stories you hear about here. It's like the way that I lived in San Francisco in the 90s.
Everyone, that's why I think San Franciscans love Barcelona so much, is because there's something that two cities have in common. We are officially sister cities.
Yes, we are.
My predecessor, David Campos, created the sister city relationship with Barcelona.
Oh.
But they gentrified along the same sort of path. And what I was able to do in the early 2000s in San Francisco, which was very similar, living off a nonprofit salary in the heart of the Mission, or in Vernal, nobody can do today. And nobody could do today in Barcelona what I did, which was work. I had 2 clients a day, and I'd walk from one house to the next. I'd go to my Spanish class, and then I'd go home and hang out. Oh gosh, it was so wonderful.
It's so interesting. Wonderful. My personal experience, I didn't go to Barcelona for my first time until, I want to say 2012, 8 years ago or something. And I loved it then. It makes me wonder, how much more I would have loved it back then. That's all.
You would have loved it.
I'm swooning over here. I don't know.
It's just like San Francisco. It's the same city, but it's not as cool as it used to be. So that was my 2 years in Barcelona, which was incredible. And then I came back to Berkeley, and have never left, really, except for short periods in California ever since.
Did you have to leave, or what was the decision? First of all, to leave Barcelona, because we've now talked about how much you loved it. But first of all, the decision to leave, and then second of all, the decision to go to Berkeley.
I wanted to spend my life fighting for a society where everyone had the privileges I had. Just the privilege to be able to get up and go and live undocumented with white skin in Spain. I didn't have money per se. I pretty much did it all on my own, but it's just, life is easier for a white woman that's educated, even if she's middle working class, than it is for people of color. And what I was able to do, and what I've always been able to do, be respected when I go into places. Again, just watching my dad when I was growing up be disrespected time and time again. I never want anyone else to go through that. And so what I wanted to spend my life doing, and what I've spent my life doing ever since, is fighting to right those wrongs. And so while I had the time of my life, and it wasn't I had just a lot of fun for those 2 years in Barcelona.
Let's be honest.
My goal was to learn Spanish so that I could be a more effective advocate and fighter. Okay. And I knew that I wanted to go to law school, because that's how I thought I was going to end up being, participating in movements for change. And So I applied to law school at UC Berkeley while I was in Barcelona, and I got in. And so it was always my plan. I'm a planner. So it was always my plan to go to Barcelona for 2 years, learn Spanish, apply for law school. I was there, come back after 2 years and go to law school. So
It's one thing to plan. It's obviously another to actually follow through with this plan.
I know I'm good at following through those plans.
Awesome.
I love planning. I love thinking about what's next. So basically, I came back to go to law school, which was my plan, and I started law school at Berkeley in 1999, and I did my 3 years there. So Berkeley law school was hard. Oh my gosh, my classmates were geniuses, and I just didn't feel like a genius. So I struggled more than I've ever struggled in school before. UCSD was hard too, but I excelled at UCSD, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm not used to being like at the bottom of my class. I'm not used to being so much less intelligent than my classmates. It was a rude awakening. I was like, so that was hard for me. It was a very humbling experience. So what I did right away is I basically turned it into an all clinical course study because I was so excited about just working and fighting for justice. So I joined both the International Human Rights Law Clinic as well as East Bay Community Law Clinic, EBCLC. And so in EBCLC, I worked with homeless people who needed legal assistance at our what we called the suitcase clinic, and then I also helped expunge criminal records. So that's what I did at EBCLC, and then at the International Human Rights Clinic, I got involved in a lawsuit against the Dominican Republic on behalf of Dominicans of Haitian descent that were either migrants from Haiti to the Dominican Republic or were born in the Dominican Republic to migrant parents, but denied illegally Dominican citizenship. So I actually lived in the Dominican Republic for quite some time. I would go work there over the summer. And when I was there, I ended up falling in love and brought over my now ex-husband, but was husband at the time, on a fiancé visa to the United States, to San Francisco from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. I'll get into that later.
Okay.
But I had this, an amazing time working there. I worked in a Haitian run ONG, like a nonprofit organization. And I liked it. And we won our case before the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. I argued the case there in DC, which was an amazing experience to have as a law student. But then the Dominican government changed their constitution to get around the ruling in the case. So we never stopped the discrimination, at least, since I stopped following the case against Dominican children of Haitian descent. And so the whole experience for me was crucial to my own education, but there was something I decided I didn't like working in international human rights because who was I, this American, to go into some other country and complain about how they're mistreating and discriminating against people living there when my country was among the worst, both domestically and internationally, in doing that. And so what I decided to do was to, and this was after my second summer, I worked in New York at the Center for Constitutional Rights, but the everyday work, not being, next to and aiding the victims of the atrocities, just didn't feel right. It felt like these are great lawsuits. It's really important that this is happening, but I feel sort of a lack of accountability to the communities that are being impacted by these atrocities.
Did you feel a disconnect?
Yeah, yes.
Could it be called that? Okay.
It just didn't feel right to me. I thought, I don't feel as accountable to those communities as I'd like to feel. And there's so much going on at home. And so I pretty much switched the career track that I was on at UC Berkeley. I was looking to work in international human rights, and I decided that I did not want to do that. I wanted to work locally, and I wanted to work hyper locally. And so my last year in law school, I kind of thought the best way to bridge sort of this interest I have in international human rights with working hyper locally is to work with immigrant communities in the US.
Okay.
And so and then I kind of full circle back to my dad, right? I ended up focusing on worker rights, where I saw my dad get so mistreated as an immigrant with a thick accent, or at the time, and particularly with the immigrant community. And so I became...
Were you aware of that when you made that choice? Were you aware of that connection? Yeah.
It was
you don't have to be. It doesn't. It was
very subconscious to me until later. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Right.
I'm full circle here. There's been lots of realizations during this whole process, but I ended up getting a fellowship to work at La Raza Centro Legal in the Mission District after I graduated, and I worked with day laborers and domestic workers alongside them, accountable to them, in this very and my mentor and the person that taught me a lot of what I know. Her name is Renee Salcedo, and she was a lawyer, a UC Berkeley graduate, and her philosophy on being a lawyer and working on social justice in the community is really to follow the lead of those that are being impacted by the injustice. So he did a ton of leadership development among the day labor and domestic worker population. We created democratic structures where the workers themselves made choices about what we were going to fight for and how. And I actually created a legal clinic at La Raza Centro Legal, where day laborers worked in the legal clinic, serving their peers who were not paid their wages. And they would do the intake, and then we would discuss the cases as a group, and we would file the lawsuit or the administrative claims before the labor commissioner, and organize campaigns to get the workers' wages back. Okay. And I did that for 6.5 years, and it was amazing, and I loved it.
That was Hillary Ronen. Join us Thursday for part 2, when Hillary will walk us through her work with La Raza, and she'll share the story of the decision to run for elected office. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me, Jeff Hunt. Our website is storiedsf.com, where you can browse more than 100 episodes and help support us by buying merch from our store. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you see an option to rate and review the show, we'd sure appreciate it. And if you have any feedback or people you think should be on the podcast, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy and stay safe.